Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining. This is the UpMetrics webinar addressing the whole child, measuring social and emotional learning in after school and community programs. Just a couple of quick items to get out of the way. We will be taking questions at the end. So if you do have a question at any time, just go ahead and put that into the Zoom Q&A and we will address those at the end of the broadcast. And another thing, we are planning on having this run about 30 minutes. So the Q&A would be at the end of that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and make some introductions. My name is Brian Kitch. I'm the content and social media manager at UpMetrics. Stephen Minix is with me here. He's the director of K-12 solutions here. We also have our featured speakers, Sally Munemitsu. She's the chief collaborator and COO at Algorhythm, a leading expert in the field of SEL. And we have Penn Gottfried. He's the director of the junior league at Beat the Streets, New York. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, folks, or good afternoon to some of you, depending on where you're chiming in from. As Brian said, my name is Stephen Minix, and I'm the director of solutions for UpMetrics. Just a quick background, really quickly. I'm a former district administrator, after-school coordinator, athletic director, district athletic director, and community-based program operator. So I have a unique perspective in this space, and I'm glad to be a part of the groups that are teaming up to try to provide resources and solutions to youth development activities across the board. So today, we understand that participation in high-quality, interest-based activities leads to positive outcomes. I think this is safe to say this is the choir, the folks on this call today. You wouldn't be here if you didn't believe that was the case. And you're probably here trying to find other ways or innovative ways to look at assessing some of the outcomes of these programs. Whether it be academic progress, health improvements, mental health, financial advances, there's a variety of ways that we can look at all these different impacts that are possible through youth development programs. But today, again, the main focus today is going to be SEL, and we'll dive into that in a moment. Now, we'd be remiss to not address the elephant in the room, which is a lot of the organizations that we work with, there's some significant challenges to being able to measure and communicate the impact of said programs. Whether it's the technology is not purpose-built, whether it's the complicated flows to access and navigate the outcome data, the buy-in from the staff with such high turnover, oftentimes it's tough to get a buy-in from staff as they turn over so often. End of the day, costs. A lot of these assessments cost a lot of money, and so that's the impediment for some. Or the intellectual capital to run the tech. Sometimes the frontline staff doesn't feel prepared or trained up to do it. And we know without any kind of just directly know that without program infrastructure and actionable data, the funding will continue to dry up and these opportunity gap will continue to widen for organizations. So one way we believe that you can bridge that gap to quality program outcomes is with engagement data. When looking at engagement data, actual participation in activities relative to academic performance, social emotional learning, health and fitness, ROI, quality control, or geography, there's a lot of ways that you can start to analyze the impact of these programs. If you look at any one of these in a silo, you're missing out, is kind of the point I want you to take away from this. So layering engagement over other things tends to provide far more analysis. And today, specifically, we'll be talking about engagement relative to social emotional learning. And as Brian alluded to earlier, Sally Munemitsu from Algorhythm is far more in depth at speaking to the impact of SEL and what that looks like. And so without further ado, I'd love to pass to Sally now for her portion of the presentation.
Morning, everyone. This is Sally Munemitsu from Algorhythm. Like Stephen, my own personal background is, I was a middle school teacher and very much in the space of social impact.
Sally, if you're there, we're having trouble hearing you right now.
Brian, can you hear me? I'm on.
I can hear you, Sally.
Great. Brian, are you okay? Can I keep going?
Sorry, yeah, sorry. Go right ahead. My fault.
Okay. Sorry, folks. So similar to Stephen, you know, I have frontline experience, and so the rationale of why we created Algorhythm is this notion of what can we measure and how can we learn on a more cost-effective way. And so the space of social emotional learning has nicely become this great space where we are common. So we got to see the variety and diversity of the list of folks who are on today's call. And you span the gamut of sports-based. You know, you'll hear from one of your colleagues in a case study in a few minutes, but you also, I saw folks who did arts, I saw camps, I saw YMCAs. And so the space of SEL has been this wonderful grounding space of what do we want for our youth? What do we expect that our programs really affect? And so this is just a common definition. CASEL has become one of the go-to organizations for resources, for research. And so this is their definition on their great website in terms of just really understanding that core underlying foundational development of youth beyond the, you know, the content that they learn or the skills that they gain. And so with that, then there's also wonderful research that now supports the impact and need and importance related to SEL. So we have a series of slides here, and hopefully some of these words resonate. 21st century learning, critical thinking, life skills, grit, growth mindset. These are all other aspects that folks talk about related to youth success. And on this next slide that I have, if you were to request the slides back, we've got great research that really supports the power of social emotional learning and why it really matters. So it really matters to great outcomes that we all seek for our youth, such as, you know, higher test scores for youth to do well in school, to certainly be better prepared for the workforce. I mean, one of the big areas that we've seen in workforce development, especially here in the US, that it is really beyond our scores in schools, that there is this, you know, social, emotional intelligence, all of the non-cognitive kind of aspects of youth that really matter to be really ready for the next century of workforce. Brian, I'm trying to click through and it's not letting me move forward. Can you move me forward? Great. And so there's another great, this one, the well-being piece is actually from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So that one is a wonderful sort of meta-analysis that really talks about how well-being is the whole child perspectives, from the health aspects to mental health aspects. And then, of course, you know, the longer-term pieces related to recidivism, you know, youth in any sort of public systems. So that's a really great piece of research there on more holistic well-being. Sorry, Brian, I'm having problems moving forward on your screen.
Okay, I will shift to control. So just go ahead and say next slide whenever you want me to change.
Yep, go ahead and move it forward. So these last three pieces are also wonderful pieces of research. Everywhere you see there in the orange are all great hyperlinks to recent research that really proves the value of SEL to these very specific areas that I'm sure lots of funders ask about. And one of my favorite ones is at bottom, you know, for those of you who have, you know, bankers or financial folks on your board and such, there's been lots of talk about the return on investment. And so there's a beginning set of research related to ROI and SEL, and this is a piece of research done by Columbia University. That's a great one that a lot of folks do point to. So on this next slide, Brian, is what I call the name game. So when you're looking for grants or when you're talking to various funders and donors, there's lots of ways in which social emotional learning, or SEL, also gets named or called. And so if you look at this growing list of ways in which we're basically talking about the same things, and so as you look to think about what your program really does, yes, you do it through the arts, or yes, you do it through sports. But if you think about the underlying impact that we all seek for our youth, I would imagine much of it is still within this space of social emotional learning. And so these are other ways in which it gets called by various funders, especially government agencies, school districts. But basically, we are all talking about the same kinds of, non-school-based kinds of outcomes. So on the next slide, for those of you who are familiar with this logic model, a logic model is a way to sort of capture on a one-page basis sort of what is the intent of a program or a process. So in our particular piece, we know that, most youth development programs have the same kinds of long-term goals for their youth. And that's what you see popped up there. We all want our young people to have higher academic performance, better career workforce readiness, positive behavior, reduced risk-taking, and then net really want our youth to thrive, really meet and beat their own potential. But what's hard to do about long-term outcomes is to really measure them. Or it's not really a direct outcome of our work, but clearly often what gets asked by funders and donors. And so that's where this body of research on social emotional learning is what appears here on the short-term outcomes. So a lot of the research that I just showed you already proves that SEL leads to those things on the far right. And so what we tell folks is that if you've never done evaluation and learning, then start with the short-term outcomes. Measuring those things on the long-term outcome side can be expensive, trying to get youth to bring in their grades, trying to track youth after they leave your program. And so as much as you may want to understand those things, it can be timely, costly, and then honestly, it's hard for your program to learn because you contribute to that, but is it really a direct attribution to your program? And so that's where starting with this idea of social emotional learning, when you talk to your staff, this body of 6 that I have here is often where most of your programs do have short-term outcomes in that space. And then one of the unique aspects of our logic model is also marrying the body of research on positive youth development. So the space, well-researched space of PYD has been researched and proven that if your staff are empowered with these kinds of areas of knowledge and practice, that those have been proven to grow SEL. So the more that your staff are knowledgeable about about positive youth development practices, the more SEL can be grown and the more that you're likely gaining all those things there on the far right side. So in terms of social emotional learning, there are many names that I've already shown you. There are many types of SEL areas. We happen to land on these particular 6 in terms of them being more cross-cutting across a variety of different kinds of youth development programs. If you think about the variety of programs that you all run at your own individual organizations, I would imagine you thinking that there's an emphasis on certain ones versus others, depending on the program. And so as you think about what does your program do, as long as it fits within 3 or 4 of these, then basically you are really building SEL capacity. On the next slide, we are showing you those definitions. And so if the names themselves don't really resonate as you read these, think about your programs. And do you believe that your programs have these kinds of direct results from the activities that you conduct? And if you see yourself in 3 or 4 of these, again, then that's your own ability to talk about SEL outcomes. And further definitions on the next slide is that space that I was talking about on the far left side of our logic model related to positive youth development experiences. So these are research-based and proven in our data set that the more you're able to do these kinds of experiences for youth, the higher that SEL can grow. And so this is regardless if you are a camp or a sports program or a STEM program, having your staff do those kinds of experiences can really increase your SEL impact. And here at Algorhythm, we've started out with that core SEL tool and have now branched out using that basis to these other tools. And so now we'll get to talk a little bit more about our sports piece of it.
All right, so thank you very much, Sally. With that overview, we're going to switch it over to Penn Gottfried, who's going to tell us about Beat the Streets New York, give us a little background, and we'll get into a little bit of correlation between SEL and engagement data after that. So, Penn, you're on.
Awesome. Well, happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Perfect. So just a little bit of background about me. I've been wrestling about 14 years, at least involved in the sport that long. And I started at Beat the Streets around 3 years ago in a capacity more towards the high school. And then about 2 years ago, I took over our junior league, which is everything from K through 8 that we're involved in. So if you look here, you can kind of see, I think I can slide if I can go back. You see here, it's the Beat the Streets mission. Basically, we use tools that kids learn through wrestling, such as perseverance, hardworking mentality, and all the lessons they learn on the mat, we get off the mat. And so we think that'll help them succeed through life. And so we're strictly a wrestling-based program. We also have some off-the-mat components that we do, but our forte is wrestling. This is a big way where a lot of these metrics that we're doing kind of tie in. Next slide. So yes, how we work on the high school level, we partner with the PSAL, the Public School Athletics League, which is the governing body for the city. And so we kind of offer auxiliary opportunities for the kids, training centers, we give them life skills, we have training camps, things like that. The bulk of the work and what I do mostly is our middle school, where there is no governing body. So we have about 35 teams in our middle school league, about 1,000 kids. And we organize everything from practices to competitions to match nights, and just a bunch of different capacities. We kind of run the whole league. And so that's where we have the most control over, and that's where we measure most of our kids. So we measure all of these kids, at least for the past couple of years, with our attendance through UpActive as well as our surveys through Algorhythm. Next slide. So why we feel that we need metrics. The first two are grants and donations. Those kind of tie in together. We were first having trouble with grants because they kept telling us that we needed another portion, whether it be academic, whether it be health. We needed another portion where we were specifically, addressing these benefits. And our forte is wrestling. That's what we do. And so we think it works. That's why I do what I do. And so that's where these metrics come in, where it's able to tie everything together, and we don't need to offer another program. We can show that our program works in academics, in social-emotional learning. The other thing is donations. We put this, whether it's an event that we have, a social event where our donors are at, we put this in a pamphlet, we put our results in there. And we can have an easy pitch deck for our donors to kind of see when they come, why should I donate to your program over, soccer or over a homework help program. The last part is internal programming to show administrations, principals, superintendents. A big part we're based in New York City, a big part is space, right? And so we're fighting with a lot of other organizations and, a lot of other programs, whether it be Zog Sports, which isn't even associated to the school, or, after school program. Where we're fighting for space. And so to convince that principal or convince that administrator that our program works, so we should get this space to help your kids, it's really important to do that. And then it gets them to buy into the program. And, they can start chipping in some money for the program, and then it doesn't all lie on us. So it's a really important part to be able to develop a relationship with a principal or an administrator, and this is a perfect way to kind of get your foot in the door. And then lastly, to improve our current programs, and I bold this because it's probably our most important part, is that we want our kids to succeed. We want to prove that they're succeeding, but we want them to actually succeed. And so we want the results that we're getting from Algorhythm and from these kids continually coming to our programs. We want them to improve, and we want to be able to see it. And so if we go into the next slide, we'll talk about the current, how we're addressing this, and then in the future. Currently, to be honest, this is about our second year collecting data, and it's fairly new to us. It's hard, and I'm sure a lot of you can attest to this. It's hard for your employees, for your coaches. They're trying to coach all the time, and then for them to have to do paperwork and other things isn't the easiest. And so we're finding ways to kind of do that. But the initial push was just to get the data, right? And so last year was our first year. We were just trying to get as much data as we can. We carried that into this year a little bit, and now we're starting to send out the results from our algorithm surveys and go over kind of discussing improvement areas with the individual coaches. So, I print out their results, I schedule a meeting with the coach, and then we kind of go over where they can improve in certain capacities. So it's kind of more on a high level where we're just noticing different categories and trying to get them to improve. In the future, we want to really focus diligently on these results. It's going to be our main focus. And so we're going to work more quality over quantity, where we can focus on, maybe less teams, but we have webinars that, Algorhythm provides. We have coaches development that we make, where the coaches can really learn how to improve in the different capacities and really grow, their kids. We'll also make pre-made videos for each capacity where, if a kid is having, or if a team is having trouble in goal orientation, we will make a video to kind of show that how they can improve in that. And all of this ties together with, you'll see in the next couple of slides, with Algorhythm and UpActive, because when they're tied together, we can prove that our organization is working with more hours per kid, and how each hour is improved for each kid per capacity. So I think that is all I have to say. Any questions after, feel free to reach out to me, but take it away.
All right, thank you, Penn. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Stephen Minix.
As Penn alluded to, it's a journey. Data-driven programming is a journey. It takes a while to get your sea legs under you to determine what to collect, and then after you collect it, what to do with it. So I appreciate you learning in public with us. That's a pretty important thing to do in youth development, and it's a good thing to mirror for our kids. That said, Penn alluded to a study that is ongoing currently, and I wish I had more information to share with you directly about the outcomes of all of it, but we will dive into a couple specific slides now. So initially looking at positive identity relative to engagement. I'll leave the slide up so you guys can take a moment to read through it. And just to frame it, a positive identity, a young person's internal sense of who they are and their multiple identities, involving building self-esteem, exploration, and commitment of self-definition, fostering role formation, and achievement. And as you'll see here, you essentially looking at this slide, focusing in on the low engagement youth. So if looking at the first, the navy blue graph or the blue graph, depending on how it represents for you, the key takeaway here is even with the low engagement, which is 35 hours or less of engagement, at least 35 hours of engagement, you're still seeing significant growth. And I think the takeaway here is, yes, sure, we love to have high engagement, but even in the low engagement, they're still showing growth. And so there's something to be looked at there. Beat the Streets, as Penn was referring to, as they begin to look internally at their data, they can start to use this to decide how to allocate additional resources moving forward based on some of these outcomes. Now looking at social capital, another bucket to look at specifically. Social capital, the positive bonds young people have with other people and institutions such as schools, community centers, and youth serving organizations. So the converse of the previous slide, where even with lower engagement, you're still seeing growth. On this side, we're looking at increased engagement, increased dosage, and showing how that correlates to social capital growth in relative to SEL. Now, shortly stated, more time does matter as you're building time with coaches and mentors. So how do you look at your program and continue to iterate ways to get kids in front of coaches more as that's showing growth? So I think without any kind of data to look at, again, referencing back to Penn saying we started on this journey 2 years ago, you're just kind of going, you're plotting a course. But once you start to bring in engagement, social emotional outcomes, participation, dosage, when you start looking at all those things individually and collectively, you start to round out the whole sense of what's actually happening and if there is actual gains and growth in line with your program mission and values.
Yeah, and from a Beat the Streets perspective, I just think that, focusing on the lower asset is huge. So where you see those gains most is from the lower asset. So I think when you, discuss this with the programs, at least when Beat the Streets does, we focus kind of on those kids where those programs, start out and how we can kind of improve from the lower asset to a higher asset.
All right. Well said. Thank you, Penn. Yeah, with that, I mean, that's a sort of a brief window into the ongoing project we have with Beat the Streets. This slide is a series of links to other resources. So that I think we've had a couple of questions about will the slides be available. Without jumping too far into Q&A, just to wrap things up, we will, if you reach out to us via our website, there's a contact page at UpMetrics.com. We'll be happy to email you the slides, and those will have clickable links. So go ahead and let me know or send us an email if you want to get a copy of the slide deck. And then finally, moving into the Q&A. The first question is for Stephen. It has to do with what is the importance of tying engagement data to these other outcomes?
It's a great question. It's a lot easier if you don't have it. I'll tell you that, because you can just arbitrarily say these are outcomes. But imagine this. Imagine a roll sheet. Someone gives you a roll sheet of 100 kids and says this is their outcomes. Most educators or parents or folks that would be interested in the truth behind the data would say, oh, well, what was the program? How do we know these outcomes are tied to that? Well, did kids come one day or did they come a lot of days? The reason why you tie engagement to some of these additional metrics is because kids tend to vote with their feet in ownership-based activities, meaning they're not required to be there. So if kids choose to show up to an ownership-based activity and they're showing up with like a higher percentage of attendance relative to other kids, what you can start to see is, kids that come at a certain percentage clip, this is their outcome, and start siloing that information off to determine whether you should continue investment down that route, whether you should iterate your program design to get better outcomes. But without having the specific engagement information, everybody looks like a complete participant, and reality will tell us that's not the case.
All right, and second question is for Sally. It comes from David. If you are just beginning to try to implement these kind of practices in your program, what are the very first steps that you should take?
That's a great question. And so I think, if anything, it's just understanding the body of research on positive youth development. I mean, what's interesting, my partner, Kim Sable-Flores, she's the PhD in this space and all that. And what she talks about is what she calls it the no-duh finding. And so someone who's been in the space of youth development will be like, yes, these are all the things we should be doing. What we've learned in our data mining of what leads to what kinds of outcomes is what folks now talk about intentionality, right? So we know that good peer-to-peer is important, but there's an intentionality to peer-to-peer that really matters. And so one of our findings was, we saw that youth were not as not growing as much. And when we asked staff, and peer-to-peer was supposed to be highly correlated to growth for these particular youth. When we asked the staff about peer-to-peer engagement, they all said, yes, of course, we do that. But when we talked about what that really meant, it meant really engaging youth who don't know each other and intentionally pairing them up. When we really talked about the specific practices of what good peer-to-peer engagement looked like, that's where staff were like, you're right. You know, on face value, we think we do it, but to that level of intentionality, we don't. But now that I know that it's really important, that now helps me or empowers me to rethink how I do that. And so when I think about Beat the Streets, when you're thinking about youth who go out and pair up to practice. So youth generally will just go to people they know. But instead, if we know that that's important for one of the locations for Beat the Streets, that coach can say, hey, Sally and Penn, I need you guys to pair up today. So the youth don't need to know why you're doing that, but you know why you're doing that. So I think just really understanding the body of research of positive youth development, just even picking one of those areas and having your staff really unpack it, I think that's a great first step.
Thank you very much, Sally. We have one more question here. It's from Maya. It says, I would like to pass SEL info on to local micro nonprofit executive director in the community that works with children. And the nonprofit takes kids out to explore diverse areas of the city. Where can this nonprofit start and how should they incorporate SEL into their programs?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, and that would be for Sally as well.
Sure. So social emotional learning is really the outcomes piece of it. And so clearly most youth development programs are looking at, really developing youth. And so those are some of the aspirations we all have with our youth. So understanding what it is and defining it for your program through our activities, we really do believe, for example, positive identity, as Stephen, sort of defined and described, is that this better sense of self or my better sense of my community. So thinking about those various aspects of SEL, what you believe your program really does help build. And Castle, which is the website that I was noting as a great research resource, they have wonderful resources on that page related to the latest research. They have a new guide that's been published in terms of where to get started. But the practicality of building SEL is about positive youth development. So that sort of goes back to my previous answer.
All right, great. We're a little bit over time, and we want to be respectful of everyone's calendars. Huge thank you to Sally and to Penn for taking the time out of their busy schedules to do this. It's fantastic to have partners like both Algorhythm and Beat the Streets in the space. And as I said before, if you are interested in the slides, please feel free to reach out via the website listed on the screen right now. And again, thank you very much to everyone for coming.